Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Hello, Annie Hastwell with you on Sundaku, the podcast for anybody who can't resist a new book. This is a short version of the usual podcast. We're calling them Minisodes. It's an opportunity to slip in an extra author interview. Prepare to meet Megan Albany. She's a proud Kalkadoon woman and a new voice on the Australian literary scene. She's had plenty of experience writing. She's been an editor, songwriter and a journalist, and she was a key member of the script writing team behind the SBS show The Deadlies. Megan's book, The Very Last List of Vivian Walker, is, as its name suggests, about list writing, which is the optimistic way many of us try to organise our lives. It's a very funny and a very clever novel, but it's actually about a most awkward topic, for our culture anyway, death. What kind of lists do you make when you know your number is up? Is it the classic bucket list, skydiving or heading to the Greek islands? Or is it getting the cupboard sorted and finalising your tax? The Very Last List of Vivian Walker is a hard book to categorise because it really makes you think about the reality of death, and at the same time, it's quite a hilarious book. I asked Megan Albany to explain her central character, Vivian.
Viv is an average woman in a probably slightly below average marriage who finds out she has terminal cancer. And when that happens, she, of course, goes straight to her go-to place, which is writing lists. And there are a lot of things to do when you're dying, and she doesn't expect her husband to suddenly be able to step up to the plate when he never has before. So she goes about writing lists of all the things that need to be done even though she's dying, whether that's cleaning the fridge or writing her will or any of the death things. But a lot of them are the more mundane things that she just has to get on with doing.
What is it about list making? What does it represent?
Look, I think for all of us, whether we're dying or not, I think for women in particular, I think we use lists to kind of try to pretend we're in control of our lives or to try and control the uncontrollable. But it's interesting because I've been asked that a few times now, and one thing I've kind of only recently discovered is I think it's also how women love. I think we love people by writing lists because we need everything to be right and fixed and perfect and protect them. And if they'd only get through the things on our list, then life will be fine and it'd all be under our control. So I do think it's a control thing, but I also think it's a unrecognised form of love.
It's also a measure of the banality of day-to-day life, isn't it? And in this particular book, Vivian's dying, which is such a huge and dramatic thing, and yet list making is all she can think of to do at the beginning, certainly. What is that saying about where death sits in our lives?
Look, I think death is normal, and I think it is a part of our life. And what happens for me, I think, when people die is we don't remember all the spectacular things. We don't remember the dress they wore to the Grammys or what a fabulous accountant they were or any of that stuff. We remember the quirky, annoying, frustrating things, and we often remember those with affection. So all that minutiae of our daily lives, that's how we live our lives. You still have to, even if you are dying or even if you're a rock star, you've still got to go to the bathroom, you've still got to make sure there's food in the cupboard. That is our life, and I think we think life is meant to be more than that, but I think I wanted to celebrate that those little things are actually our life.
And when you're trying to deal with a huge thing like the fact that you're dying, it's a way to highlight that life goes on around you, and it's not like it is in the movies.
Yeah, exactly. And we also, I think when you're dying, you're really trying to hang on to we're living in a material world, in the immortal words of Madonna. And I think we're trying to hang on to all of those material things. And, I know certainly for my friend who inspired this book, it was really important that she had a particular glass that she drank out of, and where that glass was really important. And when my sister's best friend was dying, she couldn't eat, but she was still insisting that the carrots be julienne, not round, because she'd never eaten them round, and she certainly wasn't going to when she was dying. So it's kind of, we hang on. It's a way of hanging on to all those material things, because really life is about letting go of all those little things. It's letting go of all the little things which make up our lives.
In the note at the end of the book, you say that you've had more than the usual number of people around you die, and it's your experience of death that must have informed the making of this book. When did you decide to turn it into this book?
It kind of decided to turn itself into a book, I think. My friend Rebecca, who I spent time with in palliative care, had a very interesting approach to death, and she was quite hilarious all the way along. So she wasn't your standard person dying. So there were lots of stories for me that came out of that with her. But she'd also been a journalist, and she'd always wanted to start a publishing company. So not long after she died, I actually ended up joining a writers group and started just writing little excerpts of things. So I wasn't planning on writing a novel. And before I knew it, they all, obviously I had a lot of death around me. They all kind of had a flavour about them. And then, and then the book came together. And so then when I ended up getting a publisher with Hachette, I was not surprised at all that my editor was called Rebecca. And then I got a second editor who is also called Rebecca. So my Rebecca, I feel like, had a big hand in this book, pushing me from behind to go, you need to write this book, Megania, which is what she used to call me.
Vivian's not the only one with a list. Clinton's got a list as well. In fact, little 8-year-old Ethan has a list in this little family. What does Clinton's list tell us about him?
He's pretty simple. Like, really, I think, like a lot of men, he'd be happy if his wife was happy. And so he's just looking for that. He's looking for the easiest way to get to that end goal. And having said that, he's also fairly focused on, he wants to, as you know in the book, one of them's have sex, but he crosses it out to read make love, because he knows he might have a hope of that. Well, he doesn't have a hope of either, really, but Clint's whole thing is really just trying to get it right when he never has before. His intention's good and he really wants to help, but he's kind of useless.
And Ethan?
Ethan is the apple of his mother's eye, and I think there is a special bond between mothers and sons, and I think she's hoping to train him to be more functional than his father in relationships, or more helpful. But in the end, she just wants to spend that special time with him. And I think for a mother, I think the hardest thing about dying would be saying goodbye to a child, because your whole role as a mum is to protect them, and if you're not around, well, you've got to make sure, and your husband doesn't look like he's going to do a good job of it, you've got to try and do whatever you can to do that. And having a son of my own, I definitely could relate to how difficult that will be to have to say goodbye to a child and leave them behind.
Vivian's a really complex character, and she's not a particularly likeable character at the beginning, although she's quite hilarious, but she hasn't got much time for her husband for a start. She's a very harsh marker. How does dying change her?
When I was first writing her, there was a little bit of, she's not very likeable, but I thought, she's not likeable, but that doesn't mean you can't be loved. We've all been to funerals of people who, had a lot of traits that weren't necessarily fabulous, but someone still loves those people. And we've all loved people. We've all got people in our family like that, are hard, or they haven't worked through their stuff or whatever, but we still love them. We hate them and we love them. And that's what I wanted her to be. I wanted her to be a character that not everyone's going to love, but that Clint still loves, and she still loves Clint. And I think the one thing she realises at the end is he stays with her. And for me, that's unconditional love. Unconditional love is kind of living with people that drive you mental but never leaving. And it's kind of not a Hollywood unconditional love. For me, I've been lucky enough that a lot of my older relatives have all stayed together, and loved and hated each other to the end, and maybe that's not something we want to aspire to, I don't know, but there's some beauty in that for me. Like, that is unconditional love, and that is how we love our family. We've all got people in our family that if we were choosing them as friends, we probably would never choose them, but we still can't help but love them.
And I love the way in particular chapters, there'll be, Clint will be totally hopeless at doing whatever he has to do. But Vivian will be very, difficult to get on with. But there'll be a lovely warm moment somewhere, like when they have a game they play in restaurants where they check out people and on the other side of the room and sort of bond over that sort of thing. Can you sort of maybe run me through one of the chapters where that sort of thing happens?
Look, sorry, my brain.
Where you start with harshness but end with warmth. It sort of is the development of the relationship between them within any of these particular list associated chapters.
Look, I think that there's one of the moments for me that I really love is when Clint actually takes Viv down to the lake for a walk, and she's been harsh with him all the way up to her, but what I love about him is he can see through her prickliness, and he compares her with the plovers, and he wants to tell the whole world to leave her alone, and because he can see through her prickliness, he can see her. And there's also a chapter where Clint buys her a spa for her birthday, and even though he's done that for her, she still gets annoyed at him halfway through the chapter. And then she's like, oh, but I'm such a bitch and I shouldn't be such a bitch, but I'm dying. And it's that thing, the imperfection of them is what I love about both of them, that they don't react properly. They don't necessarily say or do the right thing, but they do still love each other, and they can see through to the other person. And I think that's why they're still with each other, because he can see underneath all of her fieriness and judgmentalness and all the nagging. He still sees a little girl, and he talks about that sometimes. He sees the little girl under her and her vulnerability that no one else can see, and she won't really let anyone else see, but he can see that. And she knows that Clint is trying, even when he's really trying and trying her patience. She knows he's trying, and she knows he loves him, and that's all they need. The rest of it's kind of just the day-to-day trying to survive life, but underneath it there's a fundamental knowing of each other that perhaps no one else in their lives really gets them down to that real nitty-gritty of who they are.
I think most of us can see moments in our own lives in this book, which is why it strikes such a chord, and it's also done so humorously. But it's kind of a warts and all look at life, but with this added, sword of Damocles hanging over it, which is her impending death. Putting the death aside, would you say you wrote it for people to perhaps appreciate their lives a bit more, or to be more aware of that death eventually comes?
I think I definitely wrote it so people can be more aware that death comes, and what you do with that, everyone's going to do different. Some people, what they'll do with that is they'll distract even more and run even more and not want to look at that even more. And other people will perhaps reflect and take a little bit more time over their lives. I think there's a lot of pressure on us to get really spiritual around death. And my take on that is often if we can see that, look, people aren't going to live necessarily spiritually or beautifully when they know they're dying, then we can take that pressure on ourselves, because I've certainly seen that. We've all probably been to funerals and seen people behave badly, or been in hospitals and seen people having barneys with either the nurse or their family, or screaming at their kids. The truth is, when we're in crisis and when death or anything bad is happening, we're not always going to rise up, and we're not always going to be our best selves. And I really write that because I want people to have some compassion for that. I want people to have compassion for each other, and when they see people behaving badly, just to perhaps question whether they know the whole story.
Do you think we deal well enough with death in our society? Like at one point, Clint's mother, who hasn't got wrinkles and doesn't look at death and doesn't behave like a grandmother, and you mention it as an ageless generation. Do you think we have this death denial going on?
I think we do have death denial going on, and the issue for me with that, I guess, is that when someone does die, and people die all the time, and we've all probably lost someone, there's no pause, and the world doesn't stop, and you kind of want the world to stop. And we don't have any rituals certainly there's no rituals in Western culture. In Aboriginal culture, we will sometimes not use someone's name for, like in very traditional culture, you won't use someone's name for a year, or longer. I know certainly in the Philippines, people have, they'll grieve for a week and then a month, and there's all these rituals set in place, and we don't really have those. And I remember going to, being up near Byron, it's kind of a hippie thing to deal with death a lot. And I went to a thing called the Day of the Dead at the Crystal Castle with my friend Rebecca, because she'd lost her fiance and I'd just lost someone recently. And when I got there, the thing that really struck me and that really allowed me to grieve a bit more again was I looked around and we all just came up and said the name of the person who died and put a picture up. But there were about probably 50 people. And I suddenly went, I'm not alone in this grieving. And they were all mentioning all these people who they'd lost, some of them years ago and some really recently. But it was just really nice to stop for a moment and remember someone we loved and know that we're not alone in that. And I think that because we tend to shove it down and not want to deal with it, sometimes what will even happen is someone dies and people don't know what to say, so they say nothing and they kind of go missing in action. And I wanted to give people permission to turn up and say the wrong thing and do the wrong thing and act badly, but at least be there. Clint was there all the way, like at least be there. Even if you're there and you're useless or you're inappropriate or whatever, just being there is what makes a difference.
Because that's, I think, what people don't really know how to behave, do they? So not talking about it or not being there is often an option.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I got asked, what's the worst thing you can say? And I said, the worst thing you can say is nothing. Someone will come back to work and you know that they've lost someone and you just avoid the subject and, oh, how you going? Good to see you back, mate. And, all that. So sorry for your loss. I can't imagine it, whatever you've got to say, but just acknowledge that person has lost someone. And some people may not even want that. There's no one size fits all. But I think starting with acknowledging that it's part of life, and it's life and death. It's not just life.
Do you feel as though your book is opening a conversation? Have you had any feedback around that?
Yeah, look, and I wasn't really expecting that, but I've had some amazing feedback from people who've either lost someone or are on a cancer journey themselves or their child's on a cancer journey. And the thing that I was really surprised and so honoured and humbled by is how many people have actually said it's, one, they related to it, but two, it's kind of been comforting for them and, being able to cry again or being able to laugh at things and being able to see themselves on that journey. And that was kind of bonus points for me because I didn't really write it with some big, intention. I kind of just wrote it because I needed to write it for myself. But I'm really happy that it's actually appears to be helpful for people.
And it's a very laugh and cry sort of book. I think the fact that you got so much humour into it is quite wonderful. And I imagine that makes people feel better about death too, that you can keep your sense of humour to the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had people who were worried about reading it because of the subject and because they lost someone and they all kind of, were laughing. But, my friend Rebecca was really funny. She did things like when she was dying, someone came to visit and she wanted to send my friend back out to all of us and prank us that she'd already died because she thought that would be hilarious. So
oh, really?
At the time it made us laugh and she made me watch an episode of Miranda where Miranda turns up and she gets a text message and she deletes it before she reads who's dead, and apparently she has to give a talk at the funeral and she's trying to guess who's there so she knows who's died. So she thought that was funny too, making me watch all these things around death while she was dying. So it certainly was helpful having a funny friend.
Definitely.
It was helpful and incredibly sad because you're like going, you're so funny, but you're dying, but you're still funny. But we can keep our sense of humour and we need to. And that's what wakes and things are for too. We tell all the funny jokes and the funny stories about people because, that's the stuff that keeps them alive. And, I love that.
Did you enjoy writing the book?
Mostly I did really enjoy writing the book. I made myself laugh a couple of times, and I think the hardest thing was writing the letter to Ethan, the letter to the son. I made myself cry with that one, but I did enjoy it, and I really mostly enjoyed it too because I'm so lucky to be in an amazing writers group, and so I got to read it. It's like a lazy person's book club where you go there and someone reads you their things and you read yours, and having such amazing feedback from people along the way really was helpful, but it really was cathartic for me writing the book.
And have you got another one in mind, or have you started another one?
Yes, my new book is going to be out this time next year, and the working title is The Tuck Shop Lady, and it's about an old school tuck shop lady who gets a bit invaded by the vegans and gluten-frees and paleo, so she has to defend her turf a little bit.
Author Megan Albany talking about her novel, The Very Last List of Vivian Walker. And watch out early next year for Tuck Shop Ladies. That's it for this Sundoku Minisode. Next week, a crazy ride through the past and future when we talk to Cole Haddon about his just-released Psalms for the End of the World. It's a book that's been compared to some very big names in the speculative fiction world, like Margaret Atwood and David Mitchell. And it's a cracker. I'm Annie Hastwell. This has been a Sundoku Minisode. We'll talk soon.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.